everybody. I'm Trey Stewart, Senate Republican leader. Today's weekly press conference for the Senate Republican Caucus is going to be focused on the biennial budget that I'm sure you all have questions about based on events that transpired over the weekend. I'm going to kick it off and then hand it over to Assistant Republican Leader Lisa Keim, as well as our Senate lead on the Appropriations Committee, Rick Bennett, to talk more about what happened. But you know, I've been pretty frustrated in what I've been hearing in the last few days since the conversation basically broke down and the Democrats flatly rejected what we proposed on our side for budget priorities and frankly, promises by the Democrats. It was largely based on trust that going forward into the next stage of the negotiation, as you know, the original thought was that if we broke things out into two different parts on the budget, we would do some type of agreement now with the understanding that going forward there would be other changes that would incorporate Republican priorities, some of which you've heard every Tuesday from January since we started session through now. What things that we had to really talk about amongst ourselves, and I applaud my caucus members for doing this, prioritizing what really matters to us. Understanding, yes, we're in the minority, but that doesn't mean that the people that we represent don't matter. They do, they should have a seat at this table, and we worked hard to make sure that they did. You've seen over the last couple of years this really explosion of state revenues, and at first it was thought maybe that's because of COVID, that there might be something going on there as we came out of the pandemic, but that appears to be sustaining. And as we look towards that, the difference between Republicans and Democrats is that Democrats want to provide one-time expenditures, but Republicans want to provide you real meaningful structural tax relief. And I said this months ago at Sunday River with the State Chamber's annual event, that we were focused on, and we remain to be focused on, those that make the least amount in Maine, but are still working. Whereas on the other side of the aisle, they appear to be focused on substantially more than that. That stayed true from January through now. It still remains true that our focus is on trying to provide some form of structural tax relief to Maine's working class and low and middle income. Unfortunately, that was flatly rejected. The Democrats are not interested in that at all, and they made that abundantly clear to us on Friday and effectively ended the negotiations amongst the Republicans. So I'm going to turn it over to both Senator Keim and Senator Bennett about that, and to talk through a little bit more about what happened, and then certainly we'll take questions at the end. I'm sure you all have.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. It comes as no surprise that Republicans are focused on the taxpayers. And as we've had these budget talks, and as it happens every year in the State House, when there's budget talks, the halls are filled with lobbyists. There's everyone here looking for this program or that program, and Republicans stand firm in always being here on the side of the taxpayer. So with this budget, like all of them in the past, they're always going up. But right now, Maine is the third highest tax state in the nation. We fall just behind Hawaii, with New York being first. When I was younger, I remember Massachusetts being referred to as Taxachusetts, and now they pay significantly less than Maine. New Hampshire, our next door neighbor, is ranked 46, and they pay half, their tax burden is half the amount of Mainers. The Augusta Democrats are increasing the tax load while Maine families, small businesses, and entrepreneurs are sinking under the weight. And with this budget, part 1 and part 2, more is being piled on. Last week, I was in a conversation with a constituent who owns a daycare. And she mentioned that the state is helping right now by sending her a check for $200 a month and her employee $200 a month. This is a way to help with keep daycare providers in business. And really, when I was talking to her, this is helping her stay in business. But she said, I just filled out my taxes. I just went to an accountant to have them do my taxes. And I'm paying an extra $10,000 because I have an employee. What would be so much more helpful to me is if that money never came out in the first place. If she never had to pay that money in the first place. That's what we're talking about. Maine people need to keep the money in their pocket. Groceries are high, electricity is high. When we talk about tax relief, it's saying Maine people who are paying to keep this place running and every other state agency running, they deserve a break and they deserve the recognition and the help that they need to deal with inflation and what's happening. Maine doesn't need to grow the size of its government. Maine needs to grow its small businesses and our families. And I wanted to make sure that we talked about what's really happening to people that are the low-income people and middle-income people that really don't get as much tax relief. When we talk about all the different programs, that was one of the initiatives that we had asked for some movement on, while the other one was really that we just look at the welfare programs out there as a whole and say, are they impacting workforce participation in some way negatively, so that we can make sure that there's no waste and that we're targeting them appropriately. And that is something that needs sort of a wholesale look and not just a one-off bill at a time. So that also was a really important consideration for us in order to have buy-in on a Part 1 budget. And I will leave now the nitty-gritty details of negotiation up to Senator Bennett to share with you.
Thank you, Leader Stewart and Assistant Leader Kime. I'm Rick Bennett from the town of Oxford. I'm the Republican senator on the Appropriations Committee. I have to say that my overall perspective is that Maine's budgeting process is broken. It's broken from the beginning. The governor spends months preparing her budget, and then it comes before the legislature's Appropriations Committee. We had about 6 weeks of work on it, largely in public hearings with policy committees. But really there was $9.4 billion of the budget that is never really thoroughly reviewed at all. So we start with a spending cap of $9.88 billion under current law, with a $9.4 billion baseline, which isn't thoroughly reviewed by the legislature. It's not thoroughly reviewed by the people of Maine. And so it starts off broken. And then we have incidents like what happened last week, which just demonstrate even further how broken it really is. We are now, because of the failure to accept any sort of input from the Republicans and our caucus priorities, we're left with a situation where the Democrats are going to go to an extra-constitutional move, which will require adjourning the legislature this week and moving forward, one would presume, all of the current business of the legislature, all the bills in various stages of drafting, committee hearings, work sessions, move it forward into the first special session of the 131st legislature, which presumably will begin next week. It doesn't have to be this way. I believe we last week, working in good faith in committee, I'm happy to see the chair of the Appropriations Committee, Peggy Rotundo, Senator Rotundo, here today, we were working well in committee. The challenge is that with this first Part 1 budget, which Republicans reluctantly agreed to go to when the governor suggested it, because we knew inevitably it meant going through the spending cap that is in current law of $9.88 billion. But again, not being in charge and trying to represent our constituencies, we said, well, we can replace the spending cap with something that's really meaningful for the people of Maine, and which ends up helping be a deterrent to spending, and that is a tax cut. We were looking at tax relief in a structural form. We negotiated during the week with the governor, with legislative leaders, and after considerable back and forth, we proposed a very modest proposal. Mind you, our budget, when it's all said and done, part one and part two, is likely to be in the neighborhood of $2 billion over the budget 2 years ago. $2 billion. And out of that $2 billion, Republicans were asking a very simple amendment, and we will happily make it available to you. The first part of the amendment was asking for $200 million, just 10% of the growth, if you will, of state government. $200 million in terms of structural income tax relief, primarily benefiting lower and middle income people. It would have ended up for a single payer being less than $300 off their tax bill. Now, mind you, we sent out $850, we sent out $450. This is just ongoing recognition that with state coffers full, we have been over collecting our taxes. More money is coming in, and we felt the taxpayer deserved a break. So our request at the final thing that was rejected by the Democrats in this building was a simple $200 million tax relief plan focused on low and middle income people. Others have either not listened to what we were saying, or they're making up what they want to have us propose. This is not a tax cut for the wealthy. This is a tax cut for the working people of Maine, a permanent tax cut of just a few $100s that they can keep in their pockets every year. We also, in this document, had another simple part, which would simply ask the governor of the state to convene a working group, not a commission, not a blue panel group, just a bunch of folks to talk about our changing workforce post-COVID. Out of the pandemic, we hear from business people all the time about their needs for finding employees. And there's something not working between the benefit packages that we have been giving folks who need it and the folks who are needing to get employed. And so we thought it was a good time, as we look at the Part 2 budget, to have that discussion, to look at TANF and Maine Care and General Assistance and SNAP and the unemployment system, without any preconceptions, but just have a conversation about it to see if we can do better. Those are the two elements of the amendment. Very straightforward, very modest, in my view, compared to where we are. And over that, we are going to shut down the legislature, and we're going to go into this extra constitutional move, which is totally unnecessary, in order that apparently all of the $10.5 to $11 billion that we will be seeing this year and going over into the next biennium is going to be spent. It's going to be spent. So with that, I appreciate your attention. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks. Folks, whatever questions you have, we've got about 10 minutes or so fire away.
You mentioned that you guys have been focused on structural tax relief since January. Why did it take till Friday for you guys to actually put a proposal on the table to actually start negotiating and debating?
Well, to be clear, it was long before Friday that a proposal was on the table. We've said, I said in January, some form of tax relief should be considered, right? And, again, we had, how many different amendments did we actually put forward in the negotiations last week? Multiple renditions. And ultimately, as low as we felt we could go in good faith, was the final proposal which you see in front of you. And again, I'd agree with Senator Bennett. It's a very modest proposal compared with what the total circumstances of state revenues and the status of things in the state of Maine right now are, and with what's being proposed by the other side, which is to spend every nickel. Every nickel is going to go out the door, and not in the form of a tax relief, but in the form of government expansion at the state level. Those are diametrically opposite views, and when our latest request was just flatly rejected by the Democrats, that was the end of any sort of proposal coming together there. Rick, if you want to add anything,
Yeah,
feel free.
the only thing, just in terms of the timeline, it was Monday, a week ago yesterday, I think, that the governor asked Representative Millett, Solomon Millett of Waterford, who's the House lead on the committee, and myself. She invited us to see about what it would take to get Republicans to agree to go beyond the spending cap, which is in current law. And she, at that meeting, suggested going to a kind of current services Part 1 budget model with a Part 2 to follow when we have a better understanding of what the overall revenue picture looks like after the revenue forecast, which will be out on May 1st. And we reluctantly decided that that might be a good idea to do that, but at the time, in that meeting with the governor, we said that in order to get our caucuses to go past the spending cap, that we would need significant, meaningful tax relief for Maine's working people. And so all of the conversations and ideas that emerged came after that date last Monday. And there were multiple iterations. And we floated several ideas with the governor herself, and she reacted to them. And we kept narrowing our focus, and ultimately presented this sheet of paper to the appropriations chairs, and they checked in with their caucuses and their caucus leaders and determined that no deal.
Was the governor sign off on the proposal that you ended up giving to appropriations?
My understanding was she was not signed off on that. I think she was trying to perform the role of mediator, recognizing that her budget was now in the hands of the legislature. I think that's a fair characterization.
Senator Bennett, on Thursday night, Thursday evening, you said you were optimistic that
Yeah.
there were still issues that you worked out. And then 24 hours later, things had completely fallen apart. Just kind of briefly, like what happened in between that time to go from you being optimistic to your party not showing up for the final vote?
What happened was what usually happens. My optimism in the way this building works didn't bear fruit. I thought that there was a sincere interest on the part of the other party to listen to a modest tax relief proposal, but given its reception, it clearly was not.
Reception from the caucuses or from legislative leaders, or
you'll have to talk with my interlocutor on this is Senator Rotundo, who I presented it to, and Representative Sachs, and she can tell you what kind of reception it received when she brought the details to the caucus leadership. But I don't know, it was just, we just heard, I don't know the details of their conversations. You'll have to ask them. But this is a very modest proposal in the scheme of things, and it was a proposal that actually didn't even require a vote, a statutory change in the Part 1. It just flagged it for the Part 2. It said that there will be at least a $200 million income tax relief plan, is primarily benefiting low and middle income people in the Part 2 budget. So we weren't even saying right now, in order to get our vote, we need all the details worked out. We felt that could wait for goodwill negotiations, and unhappily there is no goodwill negotiation on this.
But moving on, assuming that things go by, pass with majority, and they reconvene the legislature, these can still be on the table, right? Or are you getting signals that what you're interested in is not going to be on the table? Like, isn't there still room to negotiate over the next couple of months? point.
So the reality is that what they're doing with this move is signaling to us very clearly they have no interest in providing any sort of structural tax relief to Maine people. I think that's become abundantly clear in the last few days. And in fact, the counterpoints about doing something else with those funds has become abundantly clear, at least to me in the conversations I've been a part of with others. So I don't think you're going to see that. And I think if there was any chance of seeing that they wouldn't be shutting down state government and this legislature in a couple of days in order to get their way here and ram it through without any Republican support at all. And that's the path they're electing to go down.
Did you consider at all floating some language that didn't necessarily tie in a specific dollar amount, whether it be a range or something like that, without details and setting a financial number,
So you
details
want us
matter,
to
right?
just not put any sort of hard and fast numbers out there, right? And just hope that
It's
they're
not
going
my
to
job
do
to tell you
something,
what to
right?
do. I was
No,
just
I
asking.
mean, the reality is, right, it's a negotiation. We're talking about billions of dollars, right? And we have a very modest proposal of $200 million and I want to be clear in underscoring this, the extra excess revenues, okay? We have funded, what we were proposing is fund everything that we need to do in state government, and then use the excess to provide some meaningful tax relief so that we're no longer the third highest tax state in the country.
Yeah.
And that gets shot down.
If I could just add one thing, I thought it would be actually useful to put that dollar figure in.
Right.
Because we didn't have stars in our eyes. We thought $200 million was a very moderate proposal. And so we thought it might be helpful to, and we also put in the language to be focused primarily benefiting low and middle income Mainers. These are working people who are seeing this rampant inflation and are seeing their costs driven up. And sending them $450 on a one-time basis helps maybe with this winter's fuel bill, but it doesn't help ongoing with the price of eggs and the price of bread and the price of fuel. So I felt that it was actually helpful because we don't know what the revenue figure is going to look like on May 1st. And by bracketing it to a number, we felt that should give them some comfort. And unfortunately, it did not.
Time for one more? Yep.
Sure. Talking about the $200 million, and I think you said that it would amount to roughly $300 per individual taxpayer relief. So is there, in that proposal, is there a corresponding tax rate reduction that you could describe? And my second question is, your belief, it sounds like, is that the budget needs to be capped, I'm rounding up to 9.9 billion combined, part one and part two. Is that what you're saying? The law says the cap is not 10.3, not 10.1?
Well, the current law would cap it at about $9.88 billion. And for us to move away from that, we wanted to get tax relief as part of if you're going to overspend the cap, which is already, $400 million above baseline. If you're going to do that, we said, let's get some ongoing tax relief for Maine people. So what was your first
So
question?
what is that tax relief in terms of rates?
Yes. So we initially discussed and put on the table the idea of a bill that is being proposed by Representative Ducharme, which would reduce the tax rate for the people making up to $23,000, not very high income, from 5.8%, where it is now, to 4.5%. That proposal would have cost, if it started on January 1st, 2024, would have cost the state budget $273 million. And we scaled back from that, so it wouldn't have even been that necessarily. But that was a specific idea that we offered. We weren't being specific in our final language, however, because we hoped to work with the Democrats in coming up with something that was to the $200 million at least, but would be something that we could work with and build consensus about.
So you're not yet proposing rate reductions in the higher income earning groups yet?
We never talked. We never
Just
talked.
Nobody was ever talking about
Never
that
talked.
except for Troy, who was trying to put those words in our mouth, which is a flat out lie.
And
It's a
can you
flat
just
out
briefly,
lie.
I know it's complicated, I know it's tied to the 55% education law, but why do you believe 9.9 is the legal, and I'm rounding off again, 9.8 is the legal cap?
Well, it's actually written in law as such, and
That's
in
not
fact,
dollar amount?
if you look, no, there's a formula, and it allows for growth depending on a bunch of things, and it was, I think, 3.78% growth or something like that. If you go to the original budget document, look in Part I. Part I was the language which suspended the spending cap. So that was part of the governor's original budget proposal, was to suspend the spending cap under Part I. So if you look there, that's what they were asking us to do, is suspend the spending cap, in which we were saying, again, well, we might consider it because they're gonna do it anyway, but let's make sure that some tax relief is part of the package, that we just don't spend to oblivion.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to close by paraphrasing a favorite president of mine, that the problem is not that the people are not taxed enough, but that the government spends too much, and that's from Reagan. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.